Welcome everybody, we're glad you're here. My name's Adam Pratt and I work on the Creative Cloud team at Adobe. Today we are broadcasting live from the 43rd floor of the Adobe office in Times Square, New York. It's a nice spring day and we're happy to be here and we're glad you could join us. I'm not alone. With me, I'll let you guys introduce yourselves and your roles. We'll start with you, Noah.
I'm Noha Idel. I'm Customer Success Manager responsible for Publicis in North America.
Great.
My name is Rick Sullivan, and I am an operations architect with Publicis Resources.
And Lauren.
I'm Lauren Meyer. I'm a program manager with our digital media team, supporting our customer success management team.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So we're going to have a conversation today, and this is a part of an ongoing series of live stream events. We're targeting folks who are in IT who are dealing with Adobe software. So whether that's Creative Cloud, Document Cloud, Acrobat, Adobe Stock, Adobe Sign, maybe even other apps out there. We've really focused on the Adobe Admin Console as the way to manage all of those licenses and support those users. And so in this series, we're just tackling new topics. Today, we're really going to focus on the benefits of named user licensing, not only for IT, which is Rick's world, but for the creatives. So if you deploy Creative Cloud for Enterprise with named user licensing, what changes, what are the benefits, and what do those creatives get out of this new experience, of this expanded tool set? So that's what we're focused on today. Before we get into the conversation, I think it would be helpful to start with just a few key reminders of some key dates and milestones that we want to make sure that our enterprise customers are aware of. So I'm going to look at my cheat sheet here and just actually start with a little bit of a rewind on the history, right? So we released Creative Cloud for Enterprise, golly, I think more than 5 years ago now. With that has come some transition, not only the introduction of a lot of the new apps and services, but also a change in the licensing model. And we'll talk today about the transition from serial numbers and what that entails, but nobody really enjoys serial numbers. Like, we've become used to them, but tracking them in a spreadsheet, worrying if they're leaked or up to date, it's just a hassle. And so migrating to name user licensing is kind of the way forward. And some key dates to know about there include the fact that in October of 2018, that coincides with our Max Creativity Conference. We will be back in Los Angeles this year for that event, and very much looking forward to it. That's a key milestone date in October of 2018 because we will be releasing the next major versions of all of our creative applications. And at that point, if a customer has not upgraded to named user licensing and are still on a serial number, you as a customer, you'll still be entitled to security updates and things like that, but you won't be able to access the latest versions and apps and features if you're still on a serial number. So that's one big reason to move to named user licensing. The other thing is that many of our customers, not all, but many customers will have an expiring serial number that'll need refreshed come November of 2018. So with that kind of those coinciding events, it's a good time to get on this project if you haven't done it already. And then I'm just looking at my cheat sheet here as a reminder that it's also important to remember that Apple, and we use lots of Macs at Adobe, you probably do too, Apple's going to be deprecating support for 32-bit applications in September of 2019. So it's a little bit over a year away, but just want you to be aware of that so that you're not stuck on old versions that aren't supported, things like that. We want to make sure you're up to date and staying ahead of technology. So with all of those things in mind, we're here to talk a little bit about the process of what it takes to migrate to named user licensing and some of the benefits. How do the teams, the creative teams that actually use the software, how's their world change? So with that, we're going to get to talk with some Adobe teams. We're going to talk with Rick about his experience as a customer. Noha, start us off. Tell us a little bit more about your role at Adobe and how you and Rick met and how you guys started working together.
Yeah, so I'm Customer Success Manager, so my responsibility is to be the eyes and ears for our customers within Adobe and bring them the resources they need. My role with Publicis and Rick here started around moving them from a serial number to named user deployment and adopting the new admin console. So when we they entered into the agreement, the enterprise ETLA, enterprise term licensing agreement with us. At the time, we said that we're going to have the admin console. They're going to need to manage their users using the admin console. At that time, that was back in 2014, we supported only Adobe IDs. That was the main type 1 identity. As an enterprise customer, Publicis did not want to go with Adobe IDs, and their specification, their requirements was about supporting federated IDs or single sign-on.
Yeah.
Correct.
So to support single sign-on, that was not part of our environment. The admin console did not support it. So we start to work with Publicis, and especially Rick and his team, on identifying the requirements to support federated IDs. That's where we met.
Great. So Rick, why was single sign-on support important to you guys?
Clearly, with an organization of our size, managing these identities manually is just not something we can do.
Yeah.
And we also have a dedicated team for identity management, but they obviously are versed in their own particular tools, and they did not want to live out of a dashboard.
Yeah, sure. So you guys had already done single sign-on. You were using it for like other apps or
Yes.
services.
Many other apps and
Okay.
definitely many other services.
Yeah. So you'd already done it. You didn't want to do something different. You needed
No.
support for that.
We needed something that was standard and that worked with, that we could combine with our internal processes.
Yeah.
And that's what, we obviously had Adobe begin to look into.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's also worth noting for our audience that we support 3 different identity types. So for some customers, you're like, hey, we're only going to do single sign-on, bare minimum. That's what we need, and that's what we support now. And we'll talk about that transition. Some customers are smaller or just not ready for that, and they're like, hey, is single sign-on a requirement? It's not. We're about giving you options. Like, we don't want to, pigeonhole you into one or the other, but having the options is nice. But single sign-on was a requirement for you guys.
Absolutely.
So we didn't support it right away. So where did you guys go with that, Noah?
So the first business was to meet with our internal team, the engineering and the cloud tech engineering team, and who are responsible for the admin console, bring the requirements of Publicis, and there were many meetings,
Many meetings.
research to validate the requirements while the engineers are working on implementing it. And finally, it was announced that yes, now Adobe supports Type 3 or single sign-on. And that was the big news, and so we delivered the news to Publicis. Says yes, now we support single sign-on. Good luck integrating your Active Directory or ADFS with our admin console. That's when.
Yep, and those were your exact words. Good luck. And we came back with, well, we need something in between.
Yeah.
We have these federated identities, but we need something to bridge our, again, identity provisioning team in our system and your cloud. And we began a second round of talks regarding a means to create that bridge.
Yeah.
And Adobe, went back to the drawing board and came back with what you refer to as the user sync tool.
Yeah. Lauren, is that where you got involved?
That is absolutely where I got involved. So, as I said earlier, as a program manager with our digital media team, we're supporting our enterprise customers and our customer success managers in ensuring that this migration from the serial license model to the name license model is done with ease. And so Noha brought our team in, the premium onboarding team, to assist Publicis with this large endeavor. Being that Publicis is one of the earliest adopters of not only the federated ID type in the console, but then also helpful in spearheading what this tool really needed to be, what that bridge was between their internal systems and our console. We had to formulate a plan to really make sure that the implementation could be done smoothly with the least amount of impact to Publicis' end users.
Yeah. So I know we all know what the user sync tool is. We live and breathe this stuff. If we've got folks in the audience today who are like, what is this thing? Clarify. Can you summarize? I know you're an expert at this. Can you summarize that just to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So the user sync tool is an automation tool that Adobe developed specifically for enterprise customers and now available to all of our customers in order to merge that gap between the enterprise directory system and the Adobe admin console. So essentially at a high level what it does is automates the creation and provision of license to your end users directly from the enterprise directory system over to the admin console.
Got it. So I've got like in your case, Ray, you've got all your users in your enterprise directory system. Like that's how you're tracking your users. So that's already in place. Meanwhile, Adobe comes along with this admin console where we say, we put your licenses here, you bought X of this and Y of that. The user sync tool connects those two. It's like, okay, that
It's
makes
the
sense.
bridge.
Yep, great, that's helpful. That sounds good. So you guys connected, you get this deployed, and
Not yet?
Not yet.
Not quite
Jumped
yet.
ahead.
There's
Okay,
one more.
what did I
There's one
miss?
more thing. So, as part of the talks that we're having, and
Yeah.
obviously once we saw the initial release
Yeah.
of the user sync tool, we had many of the pieces to make this a successful rollout within the Publicis group. However, there was a crucial portion missing for us, and that piece was the groups functionality.
Okay,
And that group's functionality basically looks at attributes, a particular attribute within the AD record, and makes that person a member of that particular group in the dashboard. And again, that's seamless in the background. We don't have to do it. It just happens on its own. And the advantage of that, or the need for that, was that we needed to group these users logically for billing and reporting,
right,
but also in case we needed to target them in any specific way in the future.
got it.
And when we talk about user groups, in their case, is agencies, so that's how they're identified. So without the user groups, you just, sync in a whole list.
Yeah.
Right.
So a flat list is
Flat
not
list,
manageable.
you cannot manage a flat list. So the version 1.0 of the user sync tool did not support, we did not have that user group
Yeah.
capability. And so that's why we went back to the drawing board, and with collaboration with the premium onboarding team and the developers, added more functionality to support user sync tool.
So in your case,
User groups, I should
in
say.
your case, you're managing your user groups based on agencies.
That's correct.
And then, but for customers out there, it could be based on department, office, region, geography, all sorts of
Anything.
different variables.
Anything.
Absolutely.
That doesn't have anything to do with Adobe, it just makes sense for your organization. Like, how do we
That's
think
correct.
about our users? How do we manage them? Okay,
Exactly.
that's great.
How to pull them, yes.
Yeah, super.
So while this is going, it was almost on a weekly basis, there were meetings between the premium onboarding team, Lauren and Rick. Many times we'll bring more experts. If we're thinking more about, like admin console, we'll have experts from that team, or developers or support. So it depends on the requirements. We will have
Yeah.
more people involved within the company. So it's not just me or Lauren.
Yeah.
There were
Team of people.
Yeah.
a team
Yeah.
of people. It
Yeah.
takes really many people to solve this specific problem.
Yeah.
And like Lauren was saying, we developed a plan and we were going through it. So they didn't just, now user sync tool supports user groups, let's switch.
Yeah.
There was a lot of testing
Okay.
done
Making sure
to
it's
make
solid.
sure,
Absolutely.
because
Yeah.
one mistake, there were a lot of things that you were watching for.
Yeah, and again, we did not want to do a single worldwide rollout. Obviously, we decided to do it on a regional level, started with the Americas and Europe and then Asia Pacific. But obviously, before even targeting the US,
Yeah.
we did an entire ran a battery test,
Yeah.
made sure that the sync tool not only worked, but that it worked 100% of the time, because we
Yeah.
could not afford neither the downtime nor any particular issues and
Right.
provisioning or deprovisioning issues that could have
Yeah.
impacted our ability to get production done.
That makes sense. So one thing I'm hearing that I'm kind of proud of is it sounds like we worked really well with you and your team to like make this go well. We were super
Yeah.
supportive.
Ultra.
What's that?
Ultra supportive.
Good.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to hear that. At the same time, I'm also putting myself in the shoes of the audience. If they're watching this, they're like, man, this sounds complicated. Like, is this overwhelming? And I would say two differences. One is that like you guys were really the pilot customer in a pretty complicated situation. So you guys were like kind of first at it. And the other difference is that you guys are a really large organization. Like if somebody's a smaller organization, maybe not as global, not thousands of agencies and you know all these users. Lauren, you've had experience with a lot of different customers. Like, you know, your case sounds more demanding. On the simpler side, like, what's a simpler project? Like, does it always take weekly meetings, or is this can this be easier?
Oh, absolutely. So yes, our team has seen this implemented now across hundreds of enterprise customers successfully, and they run the gamut from a worldwide global entity to a small university that maybe only has a couple hundred users. And we've seen it implemented, the tool itself, within an afternoon. It really just is determined by the stakeholders you need internally to go through the various steps that we've already outlined. And there's a lot of documentation available already online that we'll be sharing later in this presentation, just to enable you yourselves as an organization to go through this process, along with having Adobe support as well available in case you need that virtual assistance.
That's great.
And something else that I wanted to really thank Adobe for is the fact that they made this user sync tool a open source. It's open source, so it's up on GitHub, and you can basically take a look at all the code yourself, and obviously tweak it to your own needs. So I think Adobe did an outstanding job there.
And good thing that you mentioned that a lot of people have done that. They did not engage our premium onboarding with enough documentation. They just decided to do it on their own.
Yeah, that's great. Cool. Again, I'm glad to hear we supported you well, but I also don't want to scare people away of like, oh, it's this big, crazy, complicated. Like, it can be complicated, but it depends on your organization, your needs, and it varies.
It's a tool that scales. That's the reality.
Yeah, so that's cool. So we finally did get this managed with your groups.
Third time's the charm.
Deployed to everybody. I want to talk a little bit about the benefits. So you've got this rolled out to your users. Are there new apps or workflow or services? We talked a little bit about fonts. Like, what's the benefit to the users? And your team did a lot of work. What did they get out of it?
So for us within IT, the first and obviously top benefit was licensing. So we now in the for the history and throughout the history of our deployments of Adobe software, we have an accurate count. We don't have to go to any of our tools and sift through reports. We can tell who has Adobe software, what they have, and in many cases
all in one place. You just get the snapshot.
Just a snapshot.
No counting, no spreadsheets, no audits, no like wondering, no. Cool.
Simple CSV export and you're done. But for us, the real benefit came from what it allowed our customers to do, and that is be more creative. And that came. We had to fine-tune how we actually deployed it at first, because it opened up so many doors, so many services that we couldn't really support and engage our agencies on each single one of them. So we kind of had to focus, CC libraries, the type kit, for example, and again, take it on a case-by-case basis. But I think that's really where the benefit for us came from. I mean, the licensing, the tracking, but more importantly, the actual experience that it provided our customers with.
So I know as we've transitioned away from serial numbers, like the newest apps like Adobe XD, Adobe Dimension, they don't even support serial numbers, right? Like, we're not going to put 20-year-old technology in these brand new apps. We're moving forward, and so to access those, you have to be on named user licensing. So I mentioned a couple. Are there any of those new apps that your teams are like using or adopting, or what's that look like?
And how are they discovering them?
So we are obviously working with Adobe on training. We've had several sessions that they've tailored and have really done an amazing job with. But apart from that, the customers themselves, because they have access to the Creative Cloud, are coming to us and saying, "Hey, listen, this new Adobe Dimensions product, we see value in this. We want to discuss, integrating into our pipeline. How can we do that?" The same thing with XD. I mean, we began our our road with XD with very simple user requests. That we wanted to have some basic mock-ups and things of that nature, but it's now expanded to the point where it's taking other products and kind of doing away with the need to buy an additional license for a third-party product. So, but to answer the question, the customers are really coming to us, and then we are working with Adobe to train them or identify where where the need is in terms of information.
Right. And that's what's cool. The other thing that I want to make sure that people aren't like freaking out about is these new apps that we're talking about, Adobe XD, Adobe Dimension, these are already included in your Creative Cloud plan. They're already included in the All Apps plan. So it's not like, oh, people are coming and I got to go purchase more stuff. You're already entitled to it. So why not unleash that on these creatives, let them, do their best work, be productive, that's why you hire them. Yeah, cool.
Exactly.
That's great.
And something very important also on the deployment side that Publicis chose the self-service too.
Okay.
So the applications are available, and the way they're deploying it to their end users via self-service. So your packaging, can you talk a little bit more about the deployment self-service?
So that is another area where we actually leverage the sync tool and Active Directory to make all these things possible. So your membership to some of these Active Directory groups gets you, specific things, and for us, we were able to basically leverage, Active Directory plus these applications plus these services very seamlessly. I mean, it really required no work at all, apart from setting the groups and populating them.
Yeah.
So again, just very, very simple to do.
Yeah.
And
So I know IT, it can be hard for IT to manage an environment with a lot of variables, right? You guys like kind of simplicity, control, I get it. What went into your decision to enable the self-service? Did that feel risky, or what was that like?
There's always a risk because you're putting the onus on the user to install their own software, but at the same time we wanted to empower the users.
Okay.
And there's no better way than by letting you install and update your own applications when you need to.
Right.
So
based on their deadlines, projects, whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. And one of the things that we wanted to avoid was that traditional long lapse between, hey, there's a new version out, and the moment that you actually get it installed in your machine.
And you can have it in a year.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. I mean,
Right.
you don't need anybody to come to your machine.
Yeah.
You don't need admin rights. You can, if you need an update, you can run the updater tool yourself. If you need a particular application that's not installed, and obviously you have access to it through your Creative Cloud membership, you can get it.
So do you feel like, I don't know if you've measured this, but do you feel like you're able to deliver software and technology to your users faster because of that? Okay.
And our software teams themselves, our engineering team, is in a much better place because we have a standardized set of applications that we deploy. And the end users obviously benefit from that because they're on the same version. There's no inconsistencies and issues because of that. So everybody kind of won in that regard.
Yeah, that's great.
And let's not forget the multilingual as well.
And the multilingual, yes.
Yeah,
So as a
what does that
multinational
mean?
corporation, obviously we must support multiple languages. And in the past, because of the nature that it was engineered, the packages themselves, the software packages from Adobe, were tied to particular serial numbers. So if you
a
want
serial
French
number
version,
for French, one for German, one for English, one for,
So now we're able to deliver one version and then set the language dynamically. So it will pick up on whatever language you are using as the default in the machine. And that was huge for us.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Very cool. So I'm thinking about the kind of some of those benefits there in terms of deploying that software to your users. They're getting it faster. You hired them to be creative. You're empowering them. I mean, kudos to you guys. It's a pretty progressive approach. Sometimes we like to control things, but the reality is like if you control everything, you need to do everything. And I suspect that you guys have better things to do than like look up serial numbers and build installer packages. So you're kind of distributing that and putting that power in the hands of the users.
Exactly. Yeah, and from a number of perspectives, I mean, from the procurement side, I mean, things are so much simpler.
Yeah.
From the management side, things are so much simpler. From the engineering and and system deployment or application deployment, it's a lot simpler. So it's again win-win for each one of these departments who in the past had to go through hoops or jump through circles rather in order to get numbers and versions, and again it was I'm amazed that we actually worked as well as we did given all those variables.
Right.
So,
Yeah. What about so we talked about benefits for you guys in IT, just easier to manage this stuff. We've got like new apps and stuff that are available to the creatives. Are there any other services like Adobe Stock or Typekit fonts or something that your teams, does that matter to them?
The first one that came up was CC libraries.
Okay.
So they wanted, many agencies wanted a means by which they could deliver, their custom branding, anything that they wanted to make sure was updated across the board for every single user. So for us, that was our first, exposure to services, and it worked really well.
So I'm thinking like logos, swatches, all those like core brand assets. That
anything that's
we need to be right and we need to be up to date.
Exactly, and then we can easily update or eliminate or whatever the case may be.
Retire.
Or retire,
Yeah.
exactly, and that worked really, really well.
Okay.
That's-
Cool. What about Typekit fonts? I think they're pretty
Typekit?
cool.
Yeah.
Have you guys tapped into those? Or?
So we do use Typekit.
Okay.
It is a fully supported service within the Publicis group, and it's one of those, again, it's very seamless. We obviously have some guidelines around it. Obviously, you can't take the fonts because they're bound to the cloud and,
Right.
and to your license of the Creative Cloud. But within that, it's just fantastic because they download, effortlessly.
Yeah.
They're just there across all applications. And, if you sign out and sign in on another machine, they're just there for you to use.
Right. And you've got, that way you've all got the same library of fonts.
Mhm.
You've got the same rights and terms. You don't have to worry about the
Exactly.
legal implications.
Yeah.
You're covered.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah, and it complements our other, font technologies and licenses. So it is actually quite remarkable in that regard as well,
Yeah.
so.
That's
yeah,
cool.
We're happy
So-
about that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm also curious, so we've talked about like the IT side of it, the creative side of it. Can you talk a little bit about the business side of it? Like, so we've done all this work, we've had this partnership, your creatives have access to all these new tools and resources, but from a business perspective in terms of productivity or partnership, like what's it mean for you guys?
First of all, on the productivity side, I can't say enough how much this change has benefited the organization because, again, we have access to a huge number of tool sets and also services, and the users don't have to worry about passwords and this is all one identity, one focus point. You log in once and you're done. And from a business standpoint, I would say for us, we are able to kind of rope in those licenses, so we're not buying additional licenses for products or people that we don't really want to extend that to. So it works out from a cost perspective and also management. The fact that we can go into that dashboard, pull a report, know exactly who is using the software, and get those numbers is huge for procurement.
Or even for the people who leave.
Or and that's a very good point. That because this is all decentralized, it's managed, or rather it's centrally managed, but not manually managed.
Yeah.
If someone is terminated or leaves a company, that identity dies, and the moment it dies, everything else and the related access dies with it.
Yeah.
And I also appreciate the fact that Adobe thought in advance of the data that might be left behind. So there is some time for you to actually go in and grab those assets before they're removed from the cloud.
And that's actually part of the beauty of this user sync tool being an automation tool. We like to say it's set it and forget it. We're trying to put in the hands of our
Literally
enterprise
is.
IT customers the ability to be hands-off, more hands-off, and manage this via your directory groups that are already in existence.
Exactly.
And as you said, the offboarding process is a big part of that tool, because there are certain configurations where you're able to remove a user or delete a user completely, yet still give access to the administrators that are part of the admin console, access to content that that user may have had saved.
Exactly.
Talking about that, we're still in the infancy of managing storage for users, and again, working with organizations like Publicis. Our team are doing the research for what we call the next enterprise storage model, where we will be building more administrative roles for the IT to manage the services. So we're constantly developing that, and being the early adopters, they're pointing out, yes, you're giving us access to that user after he leaves, but it's on the IT person to go in and grab that information. So we took that feedback, and the engineers are hard at work now developing the next set of capabilities.
And just to wrap up the business side, that's another thing that I wanted to point out, that the partnership that we've had with Adobe has not just been beneficial for us, but obviously for Adobe and customers and other enterprise customers, because they now have access to the sync tool, and obviously using us as a use case, Adobe's able to adapt this for other organizations, no matter what the size.
Yeah, that's great. Lauren, I appreciated your comment about like the set it and forget it idea, because if I'm thinking about our audience here. If you guys haven't tackled this project already, the first and most obvious question people ask is like onboarding, right? Like, how do I get all my users in there? The reality is that's kind of simple. I mean, you can just do it by brute force. You can upload a spreadsheet in 30 seconds and be done. That's actually not the hard part. The challenging part is managing it in an automated way.
And maintaining
it, right? The offboarding, I think that's actually to the enterprise, that's the bigger risk.
Correct.
Because as you pointed out, Rick, like, so they leave the organization. Does that mean I have software licenses out there that aren't used anymore? That's kind of a shame, right? I don't want to pay for shelfware. I want to reassign that. The other risk is, like in the old model, it was a serial number. So does that employee who's leaving the organization, do they still have software that they shouldn't have? Or even worse, a serial number? Like, that's a real risk, and that stinks. You don't want to deal with that. And you've also got the data control, right? So if they leave, not only do I have their license, I don't have to worry about a serial number, and I can get all their assets. So from a kind of a security standpoint, you're in a much better spot.
Yeah, agency assets, absolutely.
It also has the offboarding process, or even just change management process, right? So someone like a Publicis who has agencies who then have people coming in and out of roles or projects all the time. Freelancers, as well as our education customers who are changing on a semester basis every 6 months. They're having a huge turnover. And so this model with named licensing, you're attaching that license to a specific user. So when that user leaves, as we were talking about, you can take that license back, so to speak, and then reassign it to another user. And therefore you are lessening that gap of these licenses that sit on the shelf and are no longer used. You really can take control more so of where those licenses are being provisioned.
And even in our case, where we have obviously so many agencies, interagency shifts happen all the time. So we need to be able to react to that, and obviously, agency A does not want agency B to see their data. So it needs to be done and handled very, very quickly, and the user sync tool allows us to do that.
That's great. One of the things I'm curious about is we've talked about how big Publicis is. Can you give us like a ballpark number? Like, how big are you? What's that look like?
So while I can't give out specifics, I can tell you we're upwards of 15K in terms of the users.
Okay, so 15,000 plus users.
Yes.
Okay.
On the dashboard.
And you guys are operating in like how many countries ish? Like,
I feel like we operate everywhere. I mean,
so around the world.
Around the world.
Okay.
Multilingual.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah, we follow. The old what do they call it?
Like the sun never sets.
The sun never sets. Literally.
Yeah.
That's the way it feels.
One of you is always working somewhere.
Yes.
And also on the creative and the document cloud side, which I think is another key thing to point out to our customers, that we're not siloing this change to one product set or the other.
Right.
It's going across the board for Creative and Document Cloud products, and the user
Right.
sync tool, just to mention,
Yeah.
will work in the same way
That's a
for
good point.
both sets. So if you really are using one or the other, or both, the
Yeah.
tool will work for
Right.
you.
Yeah, and it also enhances, and this is something maybe I should have mentioned a little bit earlier, but from the support perspective,
Mhm.
all this is highly beneficial for
Yeah.
any company of any size, because things are central,
Yeah.
it's dynamic, and, or as dynamic as you want it to be.
Yeah.
And this tool scales so, from, 5 user, a single user all the
Yeah.
way to, thousands upon thousands of users.
Yeah.
So it all, depends on how you wanna implement it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just spoke about something very important, which is the support. And for an organization of your size, supporting the end users is a big task. And having a support admin you cannot have every user open a support ticket. So you have under the admin console support role, support admin. So an IT or the admin will open a support ticket. And can you speak a little bit more about how does the end user get that support at the end?
So for us, there's a lot of flexibility in how Adobe has provided that service. So we can go either as the middleman, which is not something that we always want to do,
Yeah.
but we can.
If it needs
Yeah,
it.
if
yeah.
it needs it, if it's a multi-user issue.
Yeah.
But we can go as simple as having Adobe reach out to the actual user themselves. If this is a very specific use case or issue where maybe Adobe needs to remote in and get some very
Right.
particular data. So again, from my perspective, going into the dashboard and being able to either generate this ticket,
Yeah.
tracking it myself, or assigning it to that Adobe agent and having him follow up with the customer is tremendously advantageous. And again, centrally managing it from the dashboard also beneficial from an archiving standpoint, because obviously the ticket data is there,
Yeah.
so you can just grab whatever you need and make a problem record, or whatever if you need to make
Yeah.
notes
Yeah.
and pass it on to other people.
Yeah. That's super cool.
So it has been incredibly beneficial. We've actually used that a number of times. So.
And what happens when a case doesn't close or it hangs out there?
So
'Cause it does
that,
happen.
yes, I was just gonna say, we've had, the case here and there where, it's sort of stuck in the system or not getting the attention it deserves.
Yeah.
So at that point, I'll get an email, or Lauren will get an email
Yeah.
and say, hey, I need you to kind of speed this along. Can
Yeah.
you,
Escalate.
can you escalate?
Yeah.
And, I haven't encountered a case yet where either one of them, has said no.
Yeah.
So it always gets escalated, and we get either level 3 support
Yeah.
or somebody who directly will address the issue.
Yeah.
So it's a win-win.
That's great.
And that's what we call teamwork
Yeah.
and partnership.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's great. So Lauren, I want to talk with you a little bit more because, Rick talked about how big they are. Lots of users all around the world, lots of languages, lots of offices and locations. When you look at a project this big, can you talk us through the process? Like when a customer comes to you and gets engaged with our premium onboarding team, needs some help with deployment, user sync tool, things like that, what's that process look like? And how do they get engaged?
Yeah, absolutely. So a premium onboarding team is for a specific group of select enterprise customers, but we do have a process already laid out that all customers can use. And customers also who are not working with premium onboarding do have access to Adobe support if they need virtual assistance along with the provided documentation.
Okay.
But the process itself really starts out with getting the environment ready. So if you are going with, as Publicis did, that federated login for your
Yeah.
end users, having your environment set up so that your identity provider is configured to allow access to the Adobe console and therefore verify that this user has a license.
Yeah.
Once that environment's set up, if you are going with our user sync tool, it's a pretty straightforward process setting that tool up on a server that sits within your organization, and then allowing the connection from your directory system over through the tool to the admin console, and configuring that tool to work how you want it to. So as Rich was saying, for instance, we worked with them early on to configure these user groups and make sure that the way that the tool was reading those security groups within their directory spoke to how they needed to compartmentalize their
Exactly.
users and make
Yeah.
sure that they were organized in a way that then would allow them to come back and do reporting at a later time.
Yeah.
And so what that really means is while there was planning involved and we do have a proper implementation process to follow,
Yeah.
once you've got that in place and we've gone through testing to validate it with your end users, you really have an automated system available. And Publicis is a great example of having a full end-to-end automation process, allowing users to request access, right, to
That's correct.
the software itself. If you want to talk a little more about that.
So for our customers, we obviously have a ticketing system, and they're able to request the software. Obviously, we have business approvers who request it on behalf of the users themselves, but the requests themselves are handled in the background, and because this is all AD driven, it's scripted in a way that it just gets processed, from A to B without any middleman, and obviously the customer gets access very rapidly. I can't speak
Cool.
to specifics in terms of
Sure.
the syncing,
Yeah.
but I think you can pretty much have, depending on your environment, you can have a very, like minutes or,
Yeah, you can configure the tool to run on a set cadence. So
Yeah.
if you, depending on the amount of users you have, you could set it to run once an hour. And therefore, if you've dropped a new user into that group in the directory,
Boom.
as soon as it runs again, they're automatically receiving that access. So it really eliminates, again, as you keep saying, the middleman,
Yeah.
as well as the user sitting and waiting for a week, 2 weeks, a month's time.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I hear two things here. One is your team has to do less grunt work, right? If we can be candid
Yes.
about it. The other thing is that, honestly, I've worked with customers who buy Adobe software, we're very grateful for it, and it'll be months or a year until they get around to rolling it out. And so you're talking like minutes and hours of like, new employee, new assignment, freelancer, you're in the system, automated, here's your software.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's huge.
And it's using a system that was already familiar to the end user, because who doesn't install their own apps, at
Yeah.
home via the App Store
Sure.
or the Windows Store
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yep.
So they already are familiar with it. They feel empowered. Hey, I can install what I need and come back and later and install whatever else I may need at a later point.
Yeah.
So.
And because they're doing single sign-on, like they're already doing this all day for everything.
That's what-
For email, for Office,
Yeah.
like they've been doing this for years.
Single login,
Yeah.
there's no question about which password is it
Right.
or which identity.
your
It's
password.
just it's your password,
Yeah,
and that's it.
yeah, that's super cool. That's exciting. Any other? So we talked about this a little bit earlier off camera. One of the things that we talked about with you, Rick, was the fact that you guys settled on one domain. Like
Mhm.
you have lots of companies and brands and domains. Can you talk? I think that's an interesting best practice. Not
Yeah.
required, but worked out well for you
Yeah,
guys.
It does, because it's it's actually one of the advantages that actually played into this user sync tool, that
Mhm.
we just monitored one federated domain, and it imported whatever set of global security groups we needed. Having to manually or not even manually, even dynamically manage hundreds of domains is just impossible.
Yeah.
So for us, the key was to maintain a singular identity, something that obviously the users could work with, and obviously it's based on something that they already know,
Yeah.
and
And it's global.
And it's
like,
global.
yeah,
so that was the reasoning behind that.
yeah,
I would say in contrast to that, and this was a best practice and I think the best approach for Publicis,
yeah.
for those other organizations out there who have multiple domains,
Yep.
our admin console does now support the organization of multiple domains under a single directory,
Yep.
which at a high level just means that you can set up a single directory and configuration with single sign-on once, and then claim any other domains. So we're talking tens, hundreds of domains under
Yeah.
that single directory as one point, and then from there set up the user sync tool to work within those various domain groups. So it is
Cool.
something that's available
Yeah.
if you happen to be in that use case.
Yeah, that's good. And I think that's another example of like, we're trying to cover our bases. We're trying to be
Right.
flexible. Like some people, cringe at the thought of managing hundreds or thousands of domains.
Yeah.
But we also know some customers, they just have to do that. That's how they run their business. And so we want to be ready for all of those. And so I'm glad you mentioned that we've kind of got the simple and the complex
Absolutely.
covered there.
And you know, we mentioned this off camera, but it's, you know, again, not a black box. This user sync
Yeah.
tool is fully open. You can literally take a look at every single line of code that Adobe has written
Yep.
and tweak it, understand it, do whatever you need to do with
Yep.
it.
Why is that? So you seem excited about that. Like, why?
It's not normal.
What's the big deal? Okay.
Normally, as we were discussing, these things are done in a black box for either security or proprietary reasons. You know, Adobe wisely chose to make this an open source project,
Yep.
and obviously make it very easy to understand. Everything is, you know, annotated. If you look at the code itself, or the files rather,
Yep.
they're all very intelligently laid out. So there's, you know, if you do understand how to, you know, code, or, you know,
Yeah.
in this particular case, Python,
Yeah.
it's a no-brainer. And again, it's something that you can integrate directly into your pipeline, or IDP pipeline rather,
Mhm.
with very little issue.
And I
That's
would
great.
say from that point, working with customers such as Publicis through the rollout of this tool over the past year or so, we've continued to evolve the user sync tool and develop feature sets such as, for instance, the ability to bring in user groups and other mechanisms that we are actually receiving feedback from our enterprise customers who have adopted it, and then rolling out new releases in order to answer the needs of our customers. So you'll continue to see that evolution of the tool, but because it is publicly available, you're always able to go in and update to the latest release when and if you need to.
Yeah. That's great.
Okay, and I believe the last thing, how did you communicate to the end users that now they have the tool available, they could go in and request it and use it? Communication.
So in our case, we had a membership list a mile long, so communicating was a bit of a challenge, but you know, basically we broke it down by region. So we did the Americas. We looked at within our own internal systems who had the software installed previously, and we worked directly with the agencies to make sure that we imported just the right amount of users, the people that they wanted to have the Creative Cloud or Document Cloud.
Yeah.
And we really kept the communication simple. And again, that's all it needed to be. Again, you know, creative users, you know, the attention, I'm not judging, I mean, I'm a creative myself, but the attention span's not always there. If it's not a simple communication with a screenshot login here,
Yeah.
you're gonna have issues. So
So if
for
it
us,
takes 5 pages to explain how to log in, nobody's gonna do it.
nobody's gonna do it. Nobody's
Yeah.
gonna do it. So we kept it simple. We made it available, and you know, we made sure that we covered our bases in terms of multi-instance login. So if they had their own subscription to Creative Cloud, we asked them to log out, you know, back up their stuff, log out, and obviously sign into the Publicis instance.
Yeah.
And that worked really well.
Super.
It
That's
was
great.
relatively, I think I even emailed you a couple of times just in disbelief at how easy
Yeah.
it had been.
Was there any skepticism about that, or were there like
Oh, yeah.
internal doubts about how's this gonna go?
There's always doubt. I mean, anytime
Yeah.
you're making this this dramatic shift, I
Yeah.
mean, you're trusting your partner, in this case Adobe, to come through with a system that's going to provision thousands of people and manage thousands of people. There's
Yeah.
always that
Yeah.
that risk and that anxiety. But you know, after the first day where we started to see how
Yeah.
you know it was getting out there, so to speak,
Yeah.
we felt really good about where we were, and after that first day, everything was super simple. Super simple.
Because I'm thinking, if New York wakes up and everybody comes to the office and there's hundreds or thousands of people that can't work,
Yeah, it's
like,
Yeah. That's a problem.
yeah. So you've got,
Or support tickets.
yeah, you've
Again,
got
we don't want backup.
usability, business continuity issues, things went smoothly.
Mhm.
That's great.
Yeah, and again, there's always one-off cases. I mean,
Yeah.
there's always, the person who's, got their Mac hard drive filled to the brim.
Right.
With
Or
data.
still logging in with their Gmail address.
Or still doing, exactly.
Right.
But you know what, in the grand scheme of things, when I look at the cases that came through the help desk,
Yeah.
none of them were things that, that reflected the system being broken in any way or alluded to a failure of the system.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was, it allowed me to sleep a lot better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Before we wrap, just maybe a couple last questions. Lauren, from your side, again, you guys have done this a ton, helped a lot of customers. Any other best practices or advice for customers who are, ready to tackle this project, and how do they get off on a good foot?
Yeah, great question. We recommend that any customers who haven't started yet, go ahead and reach out to their Adobe representative and just let them know that you're ready to proceed.
Yep.
We've got a lot of documentation available online already, a guide that basically walks you through the entire setup process of our user sync tool, as well as just the migration process from serial to name licensing, how you start to set that environment up, how you set your console up.
Yeah.
So that documentation is available. I know we'll have some of it available here at the end of the session.
Yeah.
And just making sure that, as I think Rick alluded to earlier, that with your internal stakeholders, you have a plan, and we do have an implementation plan to follow, but a business plan to follow to make sure you understand what your end goal really is for your organization and what you want your end user's experience to be, and work back from that using our tool set in order to get through from point A to point B.
Yeah, that's great. Rick, question for you. Most of what we talked about is history, like how we worked with you, how we partnered, how things went, and that was great to learn about. Can we pivot and look at the future a little bit? Like, what's next for you guys? What's on your radar? What's important?
I think like everybody else, it's the evolving or the new focus for us is user experience, user design. Obviously, we continue to take advantage of the millions upon millions of devices out there, and not just phones, but obviously computers.
Yeah.
So for us, XD is definitely something that we are looking to focus on tremendously as it matures as a product, which it has come a long way since the early betas. But also something like Adobe Dimensions, Dimension, where it allows a really amazing amount of work to be done with relatively very little work, and again, a creative who has no prior experience to three-dimensional design can actually just go in and again be creative, play around with it, and produce something different. And I think it's a combination of Adobe services and the software that we're most looking forward to, and the stuff that I'm sure we'll see down the road at Max and in the future. It's exciting stuff.
Yeah, I agree. It is exciting. I just met with a customer last week, and after we showed them a kind of an overview of Adobe Dimension, I got this like big sad face, and I was like, I thought this was cool. What's the problem? And she said, well, we just paid a freelancer a lot of money for like 30 hours to do that last week, and like based on what you just showed me, we could have done that like in an afternoon. I'm like, well, on the upside, now you know, like there's new ways to, and we all get stuck in our ways, right? But it's important to like keep abreast of what's changing, what's new, what's available, new apps, new workflows, and I appreciate your guys' kind of progressive approach to making it available, empowering the users to access it so they can do their best work.
And there's one other thing that we're kind of discussing this offline, Adobe Sensei, and how that further enhances all these services and products. For me, that's an obvious area of intense focus, because it's going to allow things to happen quicker within things like Adobe Stock, pretty much across the board, really, when you think about it.
Yeah, and the cool thing about like that artificial intelligence and machine learning, some of us as designers, we get a little scared. The reality is what it's going to do is it's going to free us up to like actually be creative and do the stuff we want, instead of like the grunt work and stuff that we don't want to, like help me with the grunt work and let me focus on what's human and important, and that's cool.
Do you want to, basically sit there for hours looking for a picture with a particular criteria set, or do you just, work with the system and let it, bring it to you?
Yeah, totally. We were gonna jump in there.
No, I think a time check was done there.
Yeah. We're gonna wrap up here. So thank you guys for the conversation. We appreciate you guys being here. Lovely view of Times Square. It's been a good afternoon. I am gonna wrap up with just a few resources. I'm gonna look at my sheet here. A few resources and a few dates. So in the description below the video, you will find links to 3 resources that I want to make you aware of. One is the IT Learning Hub. This is an online portal for IT admins to find all sorts of great resources, training, white papers, best practices, and so on related to managing Adobe licenses. I think it's a great resource that you'll find really helpful. The second one is some new enterprise deployment tutorials. So this is really end-to-end, soup to nuts training on how to manage and deploy Adobe software for large enterprises, including introduction to the admin console, claiming domains, managing identities, a lot of stuff that we've talked about today. So check that out. And then the third thing is the Acrobat IT Insiders Network. This is an on-demand online community specific to related to Adobe Acrobat and Document Cloud, again for IT folks managing that kind of deployment. So make sure you check those three out. And then in the future, I want to give you a couple dates to tune into. On June 26th, we're planning another virtual IT roundtable. This one will be broadcast live from London. And then in July, we're going to have another session that'll focus specifically on security and resources that are available to customers, some upcoming learning and training resources for IT. In August, we're going to have an IT Virtual Roundtable focused just on the education workflow. Some different nuances there with very large deployments and student populations that change very frequently. So if you're in education, we'll invite you back for that in August, and then we'll continue to plan these out through the rest of the year. So to our audience, thanks so much for joining. To all of our panelists, thank you guys for being here as part of the discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much for being here.